The hall was built for beings twice the size of a man, and Dean Harlow stood in it the way a boot stands in an empty room, functional, out of place, and completely unbothered by either. The ceiling stretched up 4 stories. The seats were carved from something that looked like pale stone, but hummed faintly when you touched it. Every chair in the chamber was occupied by a species that had spent at least 300 years traveling between stars before humanity had figured out that the stars were suns. Dean had counted 6 distinct atmospheric processors running along the walls, each one cycling a different blend of breathable gas for a different set of lungs. He was standing in the back. That was fine. The back had a good view of everything. Ambassador Eli Okafor stood at the front of the chamber, near the central platform, dressed in the kind of suit that cost more than Dean's first car, and moved like it knew that. Eli was 58 years old, and had the kind of face that never told you what it was thinking, unless it decided to. He was listening to the welcome address being delivered by a Thalessi cultural delegate, a 7-foot-tall creature whose skin cycled slowly through pale gold and green as it spoke. The Thalessi communicated through a combination of spoken language and bioluminescence. Their words came out of translators as flat and even. Their light said everything else. The welcome address had been going for 37 minutes. Dean checked his watch. Then he stopped checking his watch. Dr. Nora Vance was 3 seats to his left, which was as close as she ever stood to military personnel voluntarily. She was 31, small, and had the permanent slightly squinting expression of someone who was always running numbers on something no one had asked her to run numbers on. Right now, her handheld sensor device was tucked against her thigh, screen dimmed, feeding her biological readouts of every species in the room. She leaned slightly toward Dean, without looking at him. "Their bone density," she said, very quietly. "Every species in here." "What about it?" "It's low. Even the big ones." The Thalessi looked solid, but their skeletal structure would buckle under standard Earth gravity. "That's interesting," Dean said, in the tone that meant he wasn't sure yet whether it was interesting. "The atmospheric requirements are also narrow. Most of them need oxygen-nitrogen ratios within a very specific band. About a third of the species in this room would experience neurological symptoms within 4 hours on Earth's surface." She paused, unprotected. Dean looked at the chamber, at the tall, elegant, ancient beings filling every seat, at the bioluminescence cycling through shades he didn't have names for, at the translators humming on every collar and wrist. "File it," he said. She filed it. The report would sit in a Confederacy inbox for 6 months, unread, because no one had thought to ask a human xenobiologist what she was finding interesting. The welcome address ended. The chamber lights shifted to a warm amber color that the Thalessi delegate had explained beforehand was the ceremonial equivalent of applause. It looked beautiful. It meant nothing yet. A junior Confederacy official approached Dean afterward, the kind of young bureaucrat who had learned diplomacy from reading about it and not from doing it. He was a species called Narathi, roughly humanoid, pale blue, with eyes that sat too wide on his face for Dean to ever look at directly without adjusting. "Quite a haul, isn't it, for a civilization at your stage?" The official smiled with 3/4 of his face, which was apparently the Narathi equivalent of warmth. "We have records of every admitted species habitability index, of course. Your planet scored a 2.1, the lowest in Confederacy history." He laughed a little, soft, easy, the laugh of someone telling a familiar joke to a new audience. The last species to come in with a score that low, well, they weren't exactly diplomatic material. They'd already eaten 2 neighboring moons. Dean said. "But humans seem manageable." "That's encouraging." "Yes," Dean said, "it is." The official moved on. He didn't say what he was thinking, which was the most useful skill he had ever developed. He met Vrath that evening. Vrath was a Thalessi senior counselor, 7 feet of luminescent cartilage and patience, who had been assigned to the human delegation as a cultural liaison. The assignment was considered, within Thalessi diplomatic circles, a lateral move at best. Vrath had accepted it with the kind of quiet enthusiasm that either meant genuine interest or the ability to hide the absence of it completely. They met in a small side corridor near the atmospheric processors, where the hum of the machines meant the translator devices had to work harder, and conversation stayed private by default. Vrath looked at Dean with the wide, dark Thalessi eyes that caught light wrong, the pupils contracting slowly in the corridor's dimness. "You didn't speak during the address," Vrath said. "No," Dean said. "The human ambassador speaks well." "Eli speaks better than anyone I've ever met," Dean said. "I let him do that part." "And what part do you do?" Vrath asked. Dean thought about it. "The part where I pay attention to things people don't think I'm paying attention to." Vrath's skin shifted, pale gold cycling into something cooler, almost blue. Curiosity, Dean would later learn to read. "What did you notice today?" "That everyone in that hall was happy to see us come in the back door." Vrath's light held still for a moment. "Yes," he said, "that is what I noticed too." It was the beginning of the only honest diplomatic relationship humanity had in the Confederacy. Dean didn't know that yet. He just knew the Thalessi wasn't laughing. 3 days later, Nora came to his temporary quarters on the Confederacy station at 11 p.m. with her tablet in both hands, and the particular expression she wore when the numbers had stopped being academic. She sat down without being invited to, and pulled up her sensor logs. "The Vorkai scout vessel," she said. Dean had heard the name once, in passing, from Vrath. The word had landed differently when Vrath said it. The way a word lands when the person saying it has already decided not to panic. "What about it?" "It was detected 6 hours ago at the outer boundary marker of Confederacy space. It crossed without signaling, without identifying itself, without responding to any contact attempt." She set the tablet on the table between them. "It just kept moving, like it already knew where it was going." Dean looked at the trajectory line on the screen, inward, slow and straight, the way things move when they're not hiding. "The Confederacy called an emergency council session," Nora said. "It started 40 minutes ago." "I know," Dean said. "We weren't invited." "I know that too." He picked up the tablet. The trajectory line ran through 3 Confederacy systems before the data cut off at the boundary of classified sensor range. He handed it back to Nora and looked at the wall for a moment. "Get some sleep," he said. "Are you going to?" He didn't answer that. She already knew. Outside the window of the station, the stars sat where they always sat, indifferent and unreachable, and very, very old. Somewhere out past the last sensor marker, something was moving through them that hadn't introduced itself. And in the back of a welcome ceremony that had gone on 37 minutes longer than necessary, a species from a 2.1 habitability world had been standing very quietly in the corner, paying attention to things no one thought they were paying attention to. The Confederacy would remember that later. The observation suite had a couch, a window, and a meal dispenser stocked with things that were almost food. It also had 3 recording devices built into the walls, which the Confederacy had not mentioned, and Dean had found in 20 minutes using a signal scanner he was not officially supposed to have. He left the devices running. It was better to let people think their surveillance was working. The official message from the Confederacy War Council had been polite, almost warm. Humanity's delegation was asked to remain in the suite while sensitive security discussions were conducted. All their needs would be met. The window had a view of the station's external ring, which was, they were assured, quite scenic. Eli Okafor read the message twice, set it down on the table, and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "Dean." "Already on it," Dean said. By morning, they had 3 separate data feeds running through Nora's modified equipment. one back-channel contact through a Narathi trade clerk who owed a favor to someone who owed a favor to Vrath, and a direct line to a Thalessi junior diplomat named Kale, who was young enough to still believe that honesty was a strategy. They knew everything the council knew by 6 a.m. It wasn't good. The Vorkai were not new. That was the first thing. They had been a known presence at the outer edge of galactic records for over 400 years, appearing at the margins of Confederacy space like a weather system that hadn't decided yet whether to move inland. The Confederacy had 47 documented contact events with Vorkai vessels. 0 successful communications, 0 hostile engagements. Until now. The scout vessel had been joined by 2 more, then 6. The sensor array at the boundary marker had caught the edge of something larger behind them. Something that the Confederacy's long-range equipment could only read as a massed shadow, a shape too big to resolve into detail at this distance. Vrath found Dean in the corridor outside the suite at 7 a.m. The Thalessi counselor's bioluminescence was running low and even, which Dean had learned to read as the controlled stillness of someone who had already processed their fear and moved past it into something colder. Vrath passed him a data chip without stopping walking. Dean palmed it. Didn't look at it yet. How bad? Bad enough that they called the session before the outer station commanders had finished their own reports, Vrath said. They wanted a decision before the full picture arrived. What kind of decision? Vrath's light dimmed, just slightly. The kind that is easier to make before you know everything. Dean looked at the chip. The Council's plan, Vrath said. Read it, then tell me what you think it says between the lines. Dean read it an hour later, sitting on the observation suite couch, with Nora across from him, and Eli standing at the window, with his hands in his pockets. The plan was 22 pages of Confederacy standard documentation. Measured, logical, structured around something the Confederacy called graduated withdrawal protocol, which was a very composed way of saying they intended to offer the Vorkai a negotiated retreat. Confederacy systems at the outer boundary, abandoned in exchange for a ceasefire commitment. Give them the edge. Keep the core. Survive intact. Then he set it down. They're going to give the Vorkai whatever they ask for, he said. The projections support it, Nora said, carefully. She was reading her own copy. Their military modeling shows a 74% chance of preserving core Confederacy infrastructure through early concession. And the other 26%? She didn't answer that. The Vorkai have done this before, Dean said, not a question. 37 documented cases in the records we could access, Nora said. Civilizations at the outer edge. The Vorkai approach. A demand is made or implied. The civilization withdraws or concedes. The Vorkai absorb the territory. She looked up. Then they come back. Every time. The withdrawal just tells them where the new edge is. Eli turned from the window. The Council knows that. Yes, Dean said, and they're still choosing this. They're choosing the 74%, Dean said. I just think the math is wrong. From Nora's tablet. A comm notification blinked. She opened it. A single frame from a monitoring feed at Outer Station Keller. A brief unit movement log. Automated. The kind of thing that got filed and forwarded and mostly ignored. She almost scrolled past it. She didn't. Dean, she said. He looked at the tablet. The 14th Rapid Deployment Unit had been moved to Outer Station Keller as a precautionary repositioning, effective 2 days ago. Standard procedure in a low-level threat escalation. The unit manifest was attached as a standard file. June Harlow, Corporal, 14th Rapid Deployment. Dean looked at it for the amount of time it took him to make sure his face wasn't doing anything, and then he handed the tablet back. File it, he said. Nora filed it. She did not say anything about his face. She had learned that from him, probably. Eli sent the formal request to address the War Council at 9 a.m., declined at 9:14. He sent it again at 9:30, with a different subject line that framed it as a routine diplomatic courtesy rather than an emergency appeal. Declined at 9:47. He sent it a third time at 10 a.m. This time, he copied the Narathi official who had made the joke about moons at the induction ceremony. The one who had said humanity seemed manageable. Eli did not add a note. He just copied him. The Narathi official forwarded it up his internal chain at 10:06, almost certainly as a dismissal. The clerical equivalent of passing something along to prove you'd seen it. The council accepted the request at 10:23. Dean watched Eli read the acceptance message. Eli did not change his expression. He just reached for his jacket. "You want to come?" he said to Dean. "No," Dean said. "You do better in rooms when I'm not in them." Eli considered this and nodded, because it was true. Dean was the kind of presence that reminded people, without doing anything specific, that the conversation had stakes. Useful sometimes. Not useful in a room where you needed people to lower their guard. Nora picked up her tablet. "I'm coming," she said. Eli looked at her. "I have the biological report," she said. "The full one. I've been working on the translation into Confederacy Standard for 2 months." She held up the tablet. "If you're going to walk in there and tell them they're making a mistake, you need to show them what they're offering the Vorkai instead." Then, at Nora. "How long is it?" he said. 86 pages, she said. A small silence. "I'll summarize," she said. Eli picked up his jacket. Outside, the station hummed around them. Gas processors, translation arrays, the distant low vibration of a structure built to hold 100 species in careful, climate-controlled proximity. Somewhere past the observation window, the Vorkai were still moving. Slow and straight, like something that didn't need to hurry because it had done this before and knew exactly how it ended. They had never met a species from a 2.1. The corridor to the council chamber was a long walk. Eli walked it like the room was already his. The War Council chamber held 22 species. Nora had counted them at the door, automatically, the way she counted everything. 22 species. Their atmospheric processors humming in the walls, their translator devices glowing faintly at wrists and collars. The room smelled like 6 different kinds of air. The council table was an oval that stretched 40 feet, end to end, and every seat was filled with something ancient and vast, and deeply, profoundly certain that this situation was under control. Eli Okafor walked to the center of the chamber and set Nora's summary document on the table in front of Counselor Vrath. Then he stepped back. Vrath looked at the document, then at Eli. The Thalessi counselor's light ran a slow, steady amber, recognition, and something behind it that wasn't quite surprise. "Before you proceed with the withdrawal protocol," Eli said, "there's a biological report the council hasn't seen. It was filed 6 months ago. It concerns what you'd be leaving behind if you give the Vorkai the outer systems." A Narathi council member leaned forward. "The outer systems contain no strategically significant human presence." "It concerns what humanity is," Eli said, "not where we are." The room was quiet. Eli looked at Nora. Nora walked to the presentation console. She was not a person who performed. She didn't adjust her posture, or take a breath or look around the room to gauge the temperature of it. She just pulled up her first slide and started talking. "Earth's surface gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared," she said. "The Confederacy average for inhabited worlds is 6.1. This difference is not trivial." She moved to her second slide. Bone density comparisons. A chart showing skeletal mineral composition across 40 admitted Confederacy species, with Earth humans at the far right of the scale, a bar that stuck up past the others, the way a fence post sticks up past a row of grass. Human skeletal structure is dense enough that in Confederacy medical classification, it registers as semi-mineralized architecture. What that means practically, a human can take physical impacts that would fracture the load-bearing bones of most species in this room. She showed a comparative pathogen response chart. Human immune systems, when invaded by foreign biological material, treated it as a war. Not a negotiation, Nora said. A war. The body commits to it completely. Sometimes it wins by a margin that would be considered catastrophic in any military operation. The host survives, but the process nearly kills them. And then they cannot be hurt that way again. Counselor Vrath, who had been very still through all of this, said, "You recover." "Yes," Nora said. "And after recovery, that specific attack cannot reach you the same way." "Correct." The chamber was quiet in a new way. The kind of quiet that comes when a room full of intelligent beings is recalibrating at the same time, and none of them wants to be the first one to say what they're recalibrating toward. A Thalessi researcher at the far end of the table pulled up his own screen and began running a cross-reference. Nora let him work. She moved to the Predator slide. Earth's fossil record. Not the full picture, just the headline. A planet where for most of its biological history, every organism existed in a food chain, where things ate each other from the smallest cellular level to the largest physical scale, where the development of intelligence happened not in safety, not in comfort, not in the measured evolutionary progression of a world that had already sorted out who was going to survive, but in the middle of it, in the pressure of it. Every species in this room evolved on a world with a habitability index above 40, Nora said. Most of you above 60. What that means is that your planets were, broadly, stable. The selection pressure on your early ancestors was toward cooperation, resource management, and social structure, because those were the strategies that worked in a stable environment. She clicked to her final chart. Earth's index is 2.1. The Narathi official from the induction ceremony was in the room. Third seat from the left. Nora had clocked him when she walked in. She did not look at him now. She didn't need to. What that means, she said, is that the selection pressure on human ancestors was different. Cooperation developed too, because cooperation is always useful. But it developed alongside something else. The ability to continue functioning under conditions of high stress, high fear, high pain, sustained, long-term threat. She clicked to a photograph, not a chart, not a diagram, just a photograph. New York City, taken from above, 2019. 8 million people living in a space that registered on Confederacy habitat assessments as a biological hazard. Noise levels above neurological tolerance for most species. Pollution indices that would require protective equipment for any Thalessi in the room. 3 active respiratory diseases cycling through the population at any given time. And every single person in that photograph had chosen to live there. Nora let the photograph sit on the screen for a moment. Earth cities were built in places that should have been uninhabitable, she said. Humans built on floodplains, in deserts, in climates that would kill most Confederacy species in a week without infrastructure. They built, and when the floods came, they rebuilt, and when the fires came, they rebuilt again. She looked at the room, because now she was going to say the thing she had been building toward for 40 minutes. Because the danger wasn't a reason to stop. The Thalessi researcher looked up from his screen. His bioluminescence had gone a strange color, somewhere between the cool blue of curiosity and something darker that Nora didn't have a word for yet. The correlation, he said, slowly, between habitability index and species, he stopped. Started again. In our models, low-index species are aggressive. They collapse under social pressure. He looked at Dean Harlow, who had come in quietly and was standing against the back wall with his arms folded. They are not like this. No, Nora said. They're not. Dean looked back at the researcher. The researcher looked away first. Observer status, Dean said, from the back of the room. No edge in it. No anger. Just the words, set down on the table, like something he'd been carrying for 6 months and had finally found the right place to put. The room stayed quiet. A new alert tone, ran through every device in the chamber at the same moment. The Confederacy's deep-range sensor array, the outer boundary, the signal everyone in the room already knew was coming. The Vorkai had crossed the last marker. They weren't scouting anymore. Eli looked at Dean. Dean unfolded his arms. The back wall wasn't the right place to stand anymore. Lena Cross did not consider herself a hero. She considered herself a pilot, which was a more precise word. Heroes made speeches. Pilots made decisions in the time it took light to cross a cockpit. She was 27 years old and had grown up in Phoenix, Arizona, which had prepared her reasonably well for environments that were trying to kill you without taking it personally. The Kesret system sat at the edge of Confederacy space like a bruise. 3 gas giants, a belt of slow-moving debris, and a Confederacy way station that had been there long enough to grow its own culture of bad coffee and faulty atmospheric seals. Lena's squadron had been repositioned there 4 days before the Vorkai fleet crossed the boundary. 12 ships, 3 pilots to a ship, a combined sensor array that was better than anything the Confederacy had provided, because Chief Technician Rosa Park had spent the repositioning flight reverse engineering the Confederacy equipment and improving it, which no one had asked her to do, and everyone was glad she had. The Vorkai Advance Unit came in from the northern vector at 0400 station time. 17 vessels, clean formation. They moved the way things moved when they expected the other side to hesitate. Lena's squadron did not hesitate. The first engagement lasted 4 hours. The Vorkai were better equipped. Their weapon systems were running technology that the Confederacy's analysts had rated at 800 years ahead of current standard. 2 of Lena's ships went down in the first 40 minutes. At 40% casualties, the Vorkai held their advance and waited. Across 37 previous engagements, no opponent had continued past 40% loss without retreating or opening a negotiation channel. The Vorkai fleet commander had done this enough times to know the rhythm of it. The other side breaks, you advance. The war ends before it costs you anything significant. Lena's remaining ships regrouped and counterattacked. The Vorkai fleet commander sent a transmission to his command base. Vroth intercepted it and translated it for Dean later, standing in the corridor outside the command observation room, with his light running a color that had no Confederacy name for it. The transmission said, "They are still here." The response from Vorkai Command said, "Understood. Adjust." 20 minutes later, another transmission, "They are still here." In the observation room, the Confederacy's senior military analysts watched the engagement feed in near silence. One of them, a Narathi general whose species had been traveling between stars for 400 years, kept pulling up the casualty percentages and then closing them again, as if the numbers might change. They didn't. Vrath stood at the back of the room and watched Dean Harlow watch the feed. Dean stood with his arms at his sides and his face doing nothing readable. The way a man looks when what he's feeling and what he can afford to do about it have agreed to stay in separate rooms. "They're afraid," a Thalessi officer said, watching the human pilots. "They are fighting scared." "Yes," Vrath said. "Then why?" "Because for them," Vrath said, "afraid and stopping are not the same condition." The officer looked at the feed, then at Vrath. Vrath's bioluminescence held still. On the surface of Station Keller, the Vorkai's secondary advance unit hit the habitat ring at 1100. It was a targeted strike, precise, efficient, and designed, based on every previous engagement in their history, to collapse civilian morale. A population under direct threat goes to ground. It stops producing. It puts pressure on its military to end the engagement on any terms available. The war ends. A woman named Ruth, 64 years old, a retired structural engineer who had come to Station Kellar to be close to her grandson's posting, was in the maintenance level when the strike hit. The section she was in lost power. 2 corridors collapsed. The atmospheric seal on Junction 7 failed. She and 3 others spent 11 minutes stopping the seal failure with materials from a maintenance cart and a technique she rebuilt from first principles in the time it took the emergency team to get through the debris. The seal held. She spent the next 9 hours in the damaged section, and by the time the station's engineering chief found her, she had produced a written method for faster hull patching using the material combinations available on the station that the Confederacy's own engineers had not considered. She sent it up the chain in a message that started, "I don't know if this helps, but here's what worked." It worked. The Confederacy implemented the method across 3 stations within 12 hours. Vroth read the message report later and sat with it for a long time. Dean received one communication from June at 1400. It was 40 seconds long, and she was standing in what looked like a supply corridor, still in field kit, a burn mark on her left sleeve that she had not patched yet, which meant she'd been busy or she hadn't noticed, and either one was equally possible with June. "Operational, Dad. Relax," she said, and then the comm cut because someone was calling her from off-screen, and she turned before she ended it, and for half a second, Dean could see her face in profile, sharp, focused, the expression of someone who was entirely inside what they were doing. Not scared, not steady in the way that Hyde's scared, just present. He logged the comm and closed it. What he did with the rest of what he felt about it, he did somewhere internal, in the part of himself that had been keeping things for later since June was 9 years old and had first climbed something she was not supposed to climb. The engagement at Kesreth lasted 4 days. The Vorkai adjusted twice. Their technology advantage was real, and the cost of holding the line was real. And there was no version of those 4 days that was clean. But on the second day, the Confederacy analysts noticed something. The Vorkai were rerouting, not advancing, redirecting, pulling their lead units back to the northern vector, and redistributing their formation in a shape that was, according to every model the Confederacy had run, more defensive than offensive. A species that had never been stopped before had stopped, and was now covering its approach angles. On the third day, the Vorkai fleet commander sent one more transmission. Vrath translated it for the full council this time, in the chamber, in front of everyone. The transmission said, "We did not know what they were. We should have asked about the planet." The council chamber went very quiet. Dean was standing at the table now, not the back wall. He had moved to the table on the day the Vorkai crossed the last marker, and he had not moved back since. "They're recalculating," he said. "Yes," Vrath said. "They're patient. They'll withdraw and come back when they've adjusted their strategy." "Yes. So the window is now." Vrath's light went a deep, even gold. Agreement, Dean had learned, or as close as the Thalessi came to it. "Then we go now," Dean said. By dawn of the 4th day, the Vorkai were retreating. The Confederacy celebrated before the sensors had finished confirming it. There was light in the station corridors, the kind of celebratory bioluminescence running through the Thalessi population that looked from a human perspective like the walls had come alive. Dean walked back to his quarters and pulled up the casualty report. He went through the names. Lena Cross was on the injured list. Alive. She was already in the medical bay, and had reportedly, according to the attending physician's note, asked for her flight sim data before she had finished the intake forms. He went through the rest of the list. June's name was not on it. He kept going until the end to be sure. Then he sat in the chair by the window and looked at the stars, and did not move for a while. June walked in 17 hours after the withdrawal. She used her override code on the door, which technically she was not supposed to have, and she was still in field kit, and she smelled like hydraulic fluid and 3 days of no sleep, and she sat down across from him and didn't say anything. He didn't say anything either. The lights in the station were still cycling gold outside the window. The celebration was still running through the corridors. Out past the observation ring, the stars were the same as they had always been. They sat in the quiet together for a while. That was enough. The full membership vote passed unanimously. In 312 years of Confederacy history, that had never happened. There had always been one dissenting vote, or a procedural abstention, or a species that needed its arm twisted via 3 rounds of trade negotiation before it would put its name on anything. Unanimity was, in Confederacy politics, essentially theoretical. The vote took 4 minutes. Ambassador Eli Okafor accepted on humanity's behalf in a speech that lasted 7 minutes, which was short by Confederacy standards and long by his own. He thanked the Council. He cited the biological report. He mentioned Nora Vance by name, which made Nora, watching from the gallery, look very hard at a fixed point on the wall for several seconds. He did not say, "I told you so," or "We knew this would happen," or "You should have listened 6 months ago." Eli was the kind of man who understood that the most important thing you could do with being right was make sure the other side didn't feel stupid about having been wrong. Dean watched from the observation level. He was eating a granola bar he'd found in the inside pocket of his jacket. He did not know how old it was. It tasted like chocolate and very old cardboard. He ate the whole thing. Vrath gave his speech 2 days later. Not in the council chamber, in the Confederacy's open broadcast forum, which transmitted to every connected system and was archived in the Confederacy's permanent record. 11 minutes long, mostly formal language, protocol structure, the ceremonial phrasing required for the record. Dean heard about it secondhand. Vrath had not mentioned it was coming. The last part was not formal. Vrath said, on record, in Confederacy standard, transmitted to every system in the Confederacy, that the membership body had made a category error. They had built a scale to rank civilizations by the comfort of their origins, and called that metric sophistication. They had looked at a species from the hardest world in the database, and seen the danger, and missed entirely the thing the danger had built. They had given humanity a seat at the back of the room, and called it generosity. He said, the Vorkai had 37 victories. They had them because every species they'd ever met had been shaped by a world that was survivable by default. He said, a world that is survivable by default builds a species that survives by default. And a world that is not builds something else. He said, we should have asked about the planet. Dean found Vrath in a corridor outside the broadcast hall afterward. Vrath was moving with the unhurried pace of a Thalessi who had said what they needed to say and had no regrets about it. His bioluminescence was a quiet, even gold. That was a hell of a thing to say, Dean told him. Vrath looked at him. It was a hell of a thing to learn. They walked the rest of the corridor in silence, which was not uncomfortable, because some silences between people who have been honest with each other are not uncomfortable at all. Nora Vance did not attend the victory celebration. She was in her workspace with her sensor logs and her research files and 3 cups of cold coffee she kept forgetting to drink. She had started a new project. She was cataloging every planet in the Confederacy's known stellar maps with a habitability index below 15. There were 14 of them. None of the 14 had produced a sentient species. Earth was the only low-index world that had gotten there. The only place where the pressure and the danger and the relentless biological competition had pushed a species not into extinction, but all the way through to intelligence, to language, to cities built on floodplains and tools, and the decision to go find out what was making that sound in the dark, instead of walking the other way. She was writing a paper about why that had happened, about what variable Earth had that the other 14 didn't. The working title was The Variable No One Priced In. She thought she would be writing it for the rest of her career. She was genuinely, completely fine with that. Lena Cross did not go to the ceremony where her commendation was presented. She sent June in her place with a handwritten note that said, "Pick up my thing, they always do a thing." June picked up the thing, which was a small engraved disc in Confederacy silver that caught the light nicely. She put it in her jacket pocket and brought it back to the medical bay, where Lena was doing grip strength rehabilitation exercises on her left hand, with the focused expression of someone who had decided the hand was going to cooperate, whether it wanted to or not. June set the disc on the side table. Lena glanced at it. "Nice," she said. Then she went back to the exercises. She had found a workaround for the grip adjustment 2 days into her recovery. A modified hold that compensated for the reduced strength in her left index finger without reducing her control over the flight stick. She filed it as a general suggestion through the station's technical improvement system, the same filing system used for maintenance requests and supply orders. The Confederacy Flight Corps implemented it fleet-wide in 6 months. She was already back in the air by then and had mostly stopped thinking about it. The observation deck above the station's upper ring was cold. The environmental systems up there ran at minimum. It was not a space for comfort, just a space for looking, and the view justified the cold completely. The Confederacy's core system spread across the dark below, clusters of settled space glowing faintly against the distance, everything connected and ancient, and lit by life that had been moving between those stars since humanity was still sorting out agriculture. It was beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they are very large and very old and don't require anything from you. Dean was up there alone when Vrath found him. They did not talk about the war. They had been talking about the war for months. They talked about Vrath's homeworld, which had 2 suns and a tidal system so complex that the ocean moved in 4 directions at once, and no one had fully modeled it. They talked about June's transfer request, which had come through that morning. Deep-range patrol, outer systems, the kind of posting that meant she had made a decision about what kind of soldier she intended to be. Dean's face did something when he said it. Vrath did not comment on Dean's face. After a while, Vrath said, "Do you think they'll come back?" He didn't need to say who. Dean looked out at the dark between the star clusters. That specific dark, the kind with nothing in it that could be seen from here. The kind that went a long way before it hit anything. "Yes," he said. Vrath's light held still. "Are you afraid?" Dean thought about June's transfer request. He thought about Lena's hand doing the exercises. He thought about Ruth on Station Kellar with a maintenance cart and a problem that needed solving. He thought about Nora's 14 planets and the question she was spending her career on. He thought about a welcome ceremony that had gone 37 minutes too long, and a clerk who had laughed about moons. "A little," he said. The dark sat there doing what the dark does, which is nothing, which is the thing about the dark that makes it worth paying attention to. "Then we should go in," Vrath said. "Yeah," Dean said. They went in. Behind them the stars didn't shift. The dark didn't move. The Vorakai were out past the last marker somewhere, patient and old, and already recalculating, building the next version of a plan that had worked 37 times on 37 worlds that had no idea what they were dealing with. This time, they knew. It didn't make the dark smaller, but it was something.